Hello and welcome. It's Steve Rastall on the Podin Along podcast. I've got two guests with me today, which is a nice change. It's usually one. So would you please introduce yourselves?
So I'm Chloe.
And I'm Skye.
And just tell us a little bit more about what you do and how we've come to have a chat today.
Okay, so I am a letting agent. Started with my husband letting agency about 5 years ago now, and we rent out your home.
Yeah, that's right. And Skye?
I now work for Chloe at doing all of their marketing and
Yeah.
marketing your house.
Well, that's right. So we met there. I've got a second home in Abersoch in North Wales. And then I built that house. We were looking to rent it out with recent changes due to legislation there. And I looked around and I was recommended yourselves, which is Abersoch Retreats and the business you started. And then from there, we started looking at getting a house rented. It's rented. And this year it'll be pushing on a little bit. So that's the plug, isn't it?
Yeah.
But before today, we've got a few things, and we talked about lots of stuff with starting a business, where you're at in that journey, and also the balance of life of trying to get going. And I've got some quotes here of things you've said to me, such as, "We're not having it all, we're juggling it all."
Yeah.
What's that mean?
I kind of feel like, there's this thing that women can have it all, and we can. We can work, we can be anything we want to be, and that's really put out there. And it is really, really possible. We are also juggling it all at the same time, which I don't necessarily think maybe our counterparts are doing as much as ourselves. We've got so many hats. We're at work, we come home from work, we're then with the children. We've got conflicting things all the time. The children are ill, we're taking time off work, we've got to balance school plays with the work. We're just got constant plates, and or maybe the kids really need you, and then work hasn't got your attention, and your inbox is then racking up, and you're kind of constantly splitting, going, what is a priority today? Who needs me the most today? And then with that, I'm also a wife, and then there's my husband. Has he been a little bit neglected? Have I been snappy towards him? Is he picking up the kids? Am I picking up the kids? We're kind of all over the place. So yes, we can have it all, but we're also juggling it.
Because I think that brings a few points in, doesn't it? About career, balancing with family, but also that career of starting a business, which takes more out of people normally. There's different challenges than 9 to 5. Do you think there is an answer to this? Because then people say, well, work-life balance. How do you blend those in? And if you were advising someone, what would you say about where the wheels come off?
I don't know. I'd like some advice on that myself, really. I'm not at that point yet. I don't feel like I have a work-life balance. I feel, just like I've got to keep going with this business, and also I've got to keep life turning as well. And where kind of is the balance with that? You're starting a business, it's still relatively new, it still needs me a lot of the time. Where can you balance dropping the ball where your business keeps on going, your family life keeps on going? I don't know the answer.
I don't know. I feel like obviously I'm getting to a stage where I'm like thinking about maybe starting my own company in the next couple of years, and it's like, when would then be the right time to start a family and like settle down, do those things? It's like, well, if my business is then doing really well, do I want to like have a kid and then jeopardize like neglecting that a bit? And then obviously I've got a partner, and it's like, well, he also works full time and like doesn't really get a break, and it's like, well, would he then take time off to stay with the kids while I'm like building
in place? So the children then come into the office, and it doesn't feel professional. It feels messy. It feels, it's carnage at times. I mean, the first time that we met was just actually quite embarrassing for me, because I wasn't expecting anyone to come into the office. The kids were there, they were just so naughty, and I had no control of them because I was just trying to get my head down and trying to do some work, and I'm going, stop screaming, stop shouting, I'm on the phone. It's like with young children, it's horrible. Skye came in the office and we were trying to have a conversation. I couldn't think straight, I couldn't get my words out, I was like stuttering, telling the kids off, trying to be like a professional person. It was like the least professional meeting in all of the land. I just had to say, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to email you. And this was a job advert to come and help me out because I was, so stressed. I mean, it was a real advert, but it was, it didn't feel professional. It felt like I was dropping the ball. It was embarrassing. It was, But that's the juggle that we have to do. Am I going to work and trying to get this work done and trying to grow the business and trying to answer the phone, or I with the children? And I'm distracted from this. The children are running a riot. That there isn't a balance.
Do you think people are more accepting of that now? Because I remember years ago, if you'd always have a tie on, you'd have a suit. The expectations of a default behaviour have maybe evolved a bit. Did it bother you? Maybe someone who's younger, because I don't know. I know some guys who might judge you on that.
Yes.
And that was I have have not even thought about it once. Like, that's probably the first time I've been like, oh, okay, I get it from your point of view that was probably not nice for you to have to. That's the way you came across and showed yourself. And I was just, I didn't think twice about it. I was just like, there's kids running around, but she's clearly trying to run a business and also has children. I completely got it. But whether if it was a 21-year-old boy coming in to try and talk to you guys about it and there was kids running around, would he be really put off and oh, this is really weird, why am I speaking to this lady when her kids are running around like that? Would they be put off rather than because they can't relate to it?
Me of this, but there's many times that the children are there and going, please, and it's honestly desperation. It's a horrible feeling. It's just, you feel like, God, I looked ridiculous, I looked an idiot, I looked unprofessional, no one's going to trust me, because you're just trying to juggle a lot at once. Yeah.
Because I think there's another thing where I was relating back that when I started, I was very lucky that my wife picked up most things on that side, i.e. the family side. The family was already, Jack could be 4 or so, I think, the first truly big successful thing I did. So you look at that and you think, well, how does that, all fit together? Because I'm thinking, if I'd had to do that as well, and I felt I was almost at the limit anyway, or do you have to lower the limit, or how do you even begin? Or did you not think about it and you just have to then deal with it when it comes along?
Something that I need to look at and bring in. Maybe I have to get a nanny or I have to do something, but I've just had to get on with it.
Yeah, because there's only so many hours. Because I think the support network you have, because I think back, my mum used to help a lot with the kids as well.
Yeah.
And that made a real difference. And my mother-in-law too, she lived at one point more, then we moved away, and that the geography dictates that a lot as well, doesn't it? So if you think about that whole bit, and this is a one where careers for women can have it all, but can people? How do you get as much of that as you can? Is that, planning children and around that? It's this is a big topic, isn't it? And very sensitive for a lot of people. And is it around opportunity? What other things are there? Is it cultural and mentality? Where do you even start on picking how that is dealt with going forward?
I don't know what the solution is. I think maybe the system isn't really built, I don't think, around kind of a woman's timeline, is it? It's really tricky to plan. What you choose. I'll put into context amongst my ramblings is that I had a baby at 19. I had no career path. I was in university. I dropped out of university to have the baby. My husband was working, so I wasn't really on any career path or any job path. I was at home with the children. So I only started working because I wanted a sense of independence. It wasn't, a necessity. It wasn't that I really wanted to be within a career. But for somebody who, you've gone through university, you've gone on the roles that you think you should do, you've got good grades in school, you've gone on to university, you're then going into a career, planning a family around that is really tricky, isn't it? Well, where are you going? You're going to build this career. I'm 5 years into the business with my husband, and it's not there yet, is it? You're still building, you've still got ambitions, you still need to figure things out along the way. And I'm 32. So, 35, you're classed as a geriatric mother, aren't you? So where do you then start taking that time out? Because I feel like if I stopped pushing with my business, where do you draw the line? Then you've had this time off and then you tend to go on to have more children, don't you? And you're having a really big period out where you're a bit behind, aren't you?
Well, I think kids are between 25 and 11. So some of the delay, not all, but there was a level where the very busy business had started. And that did mean there was is that the right time as such? So we are a bit more geriatric parents because I think our youngest, my wife was approaching, she was 40 odd. And over. So, which was a nice surprise to some degree, if you know what I mean. But, and then I had that, and I was slightly, an older parent now, which shows now, which you then, you're still parenting in your 50s.
Yeah.
The business maybe dictated a little bit of that. But in some ways, I find it quite positive, because otherwise, if my older kids now, Jack would be grown up, they'd almost be left the nest. I could retire. I keep working because I want to see them see me working. So, do you think your mirror is what you see today? And that can change about, do you want the children now? Do you want to build the business? Do you perceive that might be different tomorrow?
Yeah, I do. I think that maybe that was the same experience that you had to your wife had. You have your paternity leave, and then you kind of straight back to work. And yes, you've got them family commitments, but they're not quite the same, are they? I mean, you go to your day at work, you come home, you've got them family commitments. You're trying to build a business and you're doing it, but predominantly the parenting is more so on one than the other.
Yeah, I think, I know that's been true for us. I couldn't say it any other way. And this isn't to try and sound cliched or curry favour, but we always saw it as two jobs, because it was for us. My wife, we had to make that balance for quite a few years, or she did, I say. But there was a level of overlap there to a point, and then we made that decision down the road that would be the focus, and she'd pick that up. I think it was also about timing, the age of the kids. Yeah. And weirdly, it's probably been more useful in the last few years for our kids, where they've probably needed that support and parenting more. Yeah. Teenage years, like they get their own challenges, and having that time to be there for them. But I haven't got an answer. I really don't know. It's like, what do you think looking in, thinking it's all to come?
I know, well, that's the scary thing. Obviously, like, I'm only 21 and I'm like, I do want to start a business. And like I said, like, it's when do I then want to take a break from that and have a kid? And it's also like, well, what's my partner then doing at that point? Like, he's older, so like he would be like an older parent, and like, to do that. And I'm like, well, that's like obviously really like a good thing, but it's like, would you be then willing to maybe be like a stay-at-home dad? That's obviously like a very not new thing, but like a very different sort of like way of living, like where I would go out and be like the breadwinner. I don't know if like from a little girl's point of view, like I've always grown up wanting to be like the stay-at-home mum, like have like my kids and like all that, and I can't wait to be a mum. But like I've also then grown up with my parents like being like really successful, and I've watched them like build that, and I'm like, well, I actually really want that as well. So like, where do I have to get to a point where I'm like, I have to choose one or the other, and I don't want to have to do that.
The juggling.
Yeah.
I think that's the key point, isn't it? That I can feel the difference here, my side of it, as it were, in a figurative sense. It's, do I have to choose? Where to a point, I haven't to that degree, because one, we needed it and we needed money and made it work. Do you know what I mean? So I didn't have choices in another way. I had to go and do that. But on that side, no, I didn't have that challenge. Looking back, it's quite different. Digress though, I think that can work though, can't it? When I was in university, I had a friend called Paul Waller. Paul Waller was a great guy. He's sort of like a man of today now, many years ago. And he became a nanny while we were at uni, helping out. He's a really cool, easy, in touch with himself guy. And his wife worked in the city and was very successful, and they took that path. And that suited him, and he was very, very well suited to it. So I think it can work. Yeah. But then you're very dependent on the nature of the partner, because best will in the world, I don't think I'd have done the best job. But I'd have had to get on with it like my wife did, I suppose. Yeah, how does that all, like, it's how do you make that choice?
I don't know, because I wasn't in that position. It was just assumed that, you had a better job than me, so you went to work and I stayed home with the children. It was just the obvious gender roles, the obvious path that we were going to go down. It was ever a decision. But for somebody like you, it actually is a decision. And I think that goes beyond our generations. We're 3 different generations, aren't we? And that was experience you've had. That was an experience I've had. I'm somewhere in between the both of you, where things are changing for my generation, but are still a little bit, gender roly. And then you're kind of the new generation, where things I think are really, really going to change within that dynamic, aren't they? This is like the first prototype, isn't it?
Yeah, because I'm X, you're like...
I'm millennial.
Millennial, but just at that point. And then, so there is that bit where I think of my daughters and their outlook. They see it as purely how will they get their careers where they want, because they're a bit too young to think, a child's more of a like a concept, isn't it? At that age, they're very young. But at some point, that's going to become more than a concept. It's going to become a want, isn't it? And then how does that all join back in?
Kind of like rehabilitating offenders and getting them back on the right path and whatnot. She was doing really well with it. And he was kind of saying, she's leaving this really good job in London and she's moving north to have kids and she's wrecking her career. And I had to have this conversation with him that was like, you know what? She's 30, like she's reaching an age where that's what you've got to think. You've got to think about whether you're going to have kids soon. Like, she's in the choice now, isn't she? Where she's having to choose whether to leave that career or whether she's having to kind of choose to start a family. And he really, really kind of, I don't know, not like looked down a little bit maybe, but why is she stopping that career? He was obviously really proud of what she had achieved, but couldn't fathom why she was making that choice. But I said, when is she going to otherwise? And he couldn't give me an answer either.
I think the other thing, people see that conversely the other way, some people, both genders, where why hasn't she gone and had children, already? Why is she, she's only ever had a career. What's wrong with her? And you do get that inference, don't you, in people. But and I think the other thing is, if you're in your 30s and you've had your career, there's no guarantee you'd meet somebody that you want to start a family with instantly. And then you see things, don't you? And the clock's ticking in a literal sense. But then what do you do? Do you jump in and it's the wrong person, or you don't believe that could work, so you don't want to bring a family to something you think will fail or don't believe in anyway? And then you've got all of those challenges too. And I think it's time we can have, you can't have more, can you? And that's what we've all got. Yeah. But in this instance, it's very, very significant, the problem it does.
You can start a business later in life, can't you? But you've only got kind of a small window that, I don't know. I think it's easier. I'll rephrase it. It's easier to start a business later in life when you could literally miss the opportunity to have a family. I don't know what the solution is. I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit of a lose solution because for me, the best way around it is having my own business by, making my own rules, being able to juggle them both. But then with that then comes a lot of other then issues, isn't there? That I then got the guilt of juggling that. I think that's why we don't really have the infrastructure in place as women. We've got ambitions, but where's the infrastructure of where we can...
Yeah, you're right. Because I'm just thinking when my wife was working, the business was doing okay. So we were talking, weren't we, that, both of my younger two had nannies and we were lucky we could do, I'd worked hard that we could do that. But if you haven't got that, and particularly say a single mum needing to do that, wanting to go forward, probably capable, able to go forward, but there's a bridge between start, revenue, and all of those bits. And then you've got the childcare layering over that, and the boundary in the hill becomes so steep, doesn't it? It's how do you get beyond that? Yeah. And you just look at, even when at the time back then, one of the reasons we got nannies is because of the cost of childcare in the area we live. I looked at it and I thought, we're not talking about much more money to do that. And we've got 2 kids. So what was the difference? And you look at it and it was very inaccessible. I wasn't convinced by it. I wasn't thinking I wanted my kids there either, if I'm honest.
But it's also of its own limitations, isn't it? If you're running your own business, there's so many times that, we're working late. We've still got to be somewhere for the children, is what I'm trying to say. You've still got to get them there. You've still got to pick them up from there. There's not a lot of flexibility with having, children in a nursery or childcare, is there? There still isn't the infrastructure. If you're working of nights, and you're a single mum, where are your children going? They're just...
But I think it's back to that point that it's based on the routine of what was probably a traditional work model that was very male orientated and doesn't necessarily adapt. There's a level of provision there, but it's still in that traditional sense, isn't it? Let's just maybe think, what is it do you think people want then? And and how do they see that? And does that change over time? Because I think I don't know if I have the knowledge and the awareness to really say this as I've studied enough, but it's almost like women have been sold a dream of you can have it all, and that seems to be unwinding a little bit because the modern world hasn't really followed up alongside that.
Yes. And I think some, maybe bigger companies have these things in place, but the rest of the working model,
Yeah.
it probably doesn't, does it? I mean, half of our workforce leave at 3 o'clock, like myself. Why? Because they're really good at what they do, but they haven't got the childcare. And we're in Wales, and Wales doesn't have the infrastructure business down the road. Please grab my children. And we're all having to like the village type of thing. We're having to become a village for each other that, you know, one will take one will take the other. I've got a day off. Do you want me to take your children? And we're all just having to pass our children around to, to friends, to family, to anybody that can take them so that we can continue operating our businesses. But then, for me operating ours is 9 to 5, but then I've got the majority of people going home at 3 o'clock because I've got to be able to facilitate. Look, you're really, really good at your job, but you can only work till 3. So, right, so you work till 3 for your children. But then it's not very good for running a business either. And I understand that. But there's got to be some give and take somewhere, hasn't there?
Yeah, no, I know in Abersoc, like just little things like the school closing.
Yeah.
So does that put another problem in where there's a travel now to that, and how do and that collect and so on? You look at these things. What do you think people will be doing in 15, 20 years' time in this way? Do you think it'll just carry on being a problem, or will it evolve differently?
It's got to evolve. I don't know. I feel like now, with everything that goes on in the world, I feel like women have to work more now financially. I think that, people need 2 incomes. So if that's the culture that we have, we've got to facilitate something for working mums as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. Because if you look that, if you haven't got that family that was close, people maybe move geographic, the mobility's higher, like move other areas, your family to support and do that. The other thing is, if you're having children older, one thing I noticed with family, my gran was in her 50s. We'll be, hopefully, but we'll be quite old grandparents.
Yeah.
That will probably limit the level of assistance we can do. So
Yeah.
it all compounds through, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And, you're then going back, well, how do you solve that? Well, you need money. But
Yeah.
when you start a business and you're trying to get on, you don't have money. So you've got this leap, haven't you, to get over to get to something. But what's perfect look like? What is it that makes that easy? Well, not perfect, but better.
I don't know. I think it's each individual will need something different. I think we've just got to have more flexible working opportunities. And I don't know what that looks like, because realistically, you're working in a hospital and you've got your set shifts, you're working in schools. I don't know how we can do it, but there needs to be something a little bit more flexible in place where we can juggle children between everybody and make it work.
Yeah, because if you look at the birth rate declining, there's other factors here about, not just our economy. You look at Italy's, it's going down very low.
Yeah.
Most of the Western economies have got this issue for varying degrees, and some of it is, I think, around career or choice or whatever. It's a big, complicated thing. But if you think, well, do you think there's been a lot of talk about this then? But the practical things of stuff that makes a difference isn't there.
No.
But there's a level of lip service.
I think it's out there to discuss, isn't it? I think you go on and you see a lot of feminist things, and that angers some people because they say you get paid the same as us. And I think that it's not about equal pay and equal rights, and it's not about that. But you've got to acknowledge like a level of that it's not equal, because we're still, what can we do?
I don't know. It's I think it's like the first thing is the provision of help. I think is a gap, isn't it? Of even covering base working hours with a level of affordable care for the child. You do look at that. My experience of that is very, very mixed. It's a while ago now. Because another thing, when you look at all this, you think, where do we actually go that we go, right, this is all going on? Because I know my wife, you go, well, she had a career. She was a teacher. She really loved her career. She enjoyed that, and it went well for her. So her having to give up work and the children, she was doing both, and she wanted to do both. And we were happy, I didn't either way. And there was a period where she didn't have to work when the business was successful, but she carried on. And then other things happened in our life where she needed to stop because of, family and just stuff that happens, that the kids had to come first at that point, she felt. So But then she sort of then realised, well, identity, that you've had something, you then give that up. You want the family, which is understandable, but then the identity goes with that, where you're sitting at home and, I was out on my bike the other day and I'm watching some lovely young girl pushing two kids. They're playing up by the canal in Chester, and she's there and she looked at the end of a tether, understandably, because they were of that age. And I think that's a difficult one, that blokes don't have to give that up, do they? And then find it back.
No, I think you give up your life, don't you, for these children? You can't just. But he wouldn't ever go, oh, next week I'm going to da 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 da. He just thought, oh, I'm going there. He wouldn't check with me that if I was having the kids. Whereas I would check with him, I'm going out on this day, basically because he was working. Like, can you make sure you don't book anything or anything like that? But you're almost having to ask permission, aren't you? And then you go back to your parents, and then I'm going asking permission, Mum, can I go out? To have the children. You're constantly like having to feel like you're accountable for, you're accountable to your parents who you're asking for help. You're accountable to your husband to make sure he hasn't booked anything. And actually doing something for yourself then is really, really hard. And then it becomes easier just not to do anything or not to go anywhere, and you've lost your identity and you don't know who you are. And it's really, you go back into the workplace exactly as you were before, maybe a bit tired, because you've had some sleepless nights. But the nights that I would be up with, it would be me up with the baby. So I was going to work tomorrow, so I couldn't put, it wasn't fair to then put that on him. So my day was a bit more flexible. So it was, on me. And I think that's what happens for a lot of people. Not everybody, but a lot of people fall in them roles.
I think they do, because with my second daughter, the business was very full on, and I was back in work the next day.
Mm.
But then my wife, I then planned in 2 weeks, 3 weeks in.
Yeah.
Because we thought that's when, because everybody sends you flowers day one. You want flowers 6 weeks later. You know what I mean? It's often you buy clothes for kids when they're born for when they're free, because everybody buys them for when they're what. This sounds simple, but I know what you're saying. The other bit is, you look at, I think about this, it also gives me tinges of guilt thinking back, because you don't get it. And there is other sacrifices. So for us, the arrangement we had worked, because we got on, we got through that. The business did all right for us. It moved our lives on, and there's things would change, of course, but it's a long time ago. At the weekend, I won't say too much because it's not, it wouldn't be appropriate to, but we know of a couple vaguely, and they've been having this issue of mum having lots of kids, quite a few children, more than I have, needs to be at home looking after them, loss of identity. Husband very busy in business. She's not doing, and then you can get the resentment, and what I'm referring to is those marital problems then that also come on the back of all of this, because everybody's spread a bit too thin. And I think that there's no end of people over the years I've seen that happen to one degree or another. I'm not saying it was the fundamental problem, but it's a consequence of. Do you think that is another thing that pushes the family to breaking point, because there's just too many aspects?
I had a newborn baby at 20, I was when I had him, and had to figure it out. But, that had to work. We needed the money. He was not employed. He worked for himself. We needed the money. That was a sacrifice we had to make. But that was probably very hard for him as well. I probably don't give him enough credit for maybe how hard that was to walk away from your wife and your baby and go to work. I think that would have been very difficult for him. But when you're in the midst of it, and then when you're celebrating someone's career because they're making much more money than you, it can feel a little bit, not nice, because the world is celebrating them. Aren't they great? Aren't they a good dad going to work? Aren't, all of these things, and you're just in the background holding the baby thinking, this is not equal, this is not fair, this is not nice feeling.
No, I know what you mean. It's I remember thinking that some of my humble success, limited success I've had, the fact I had a very stable relationship, steady home life, my wife putting that there was the foundation that allowed me to just crack on with what I was doing. And it was probably a bigger advantage than I realised. But I always appreciated it, I feel, as well. It was maybe probably should have done more at times, maybe. But overall, I got that because we had aligned goals.
Yeah.
And I think that was a very important thing, where we could see what we wanted to do with the family, with us, and people had to do different things at different times to get us to where we were going. And we've always thought the same that way. So that maybe made some things easier. Skye, your mum, compared, say, to yourself or other, how do you think this is, your expectations of a younger generation are different than people my age or older?
Again, like my mum, depending where you come from, what background you come from, like my mum has ended up doing really well, but again, when she had children, she then like went to part-time work from home. It was very like, I don't know if she was very happy to do it, but like enjoyed doing it. Like she likes what she did for work. Like she worked with like great people. Like they were happy for her to take a step back and like work from home and be with us. But I don't know if I would necessarily feel the same. And I feel like a lot of people in my generation agree with that, that the like now I'm like in a great job that I really enjoy, and that's probably like annoying to a lot of people. I'm like, well, I have found this really great job that I do enjoy, and I want it to take me places. Like, is that going to come as a sacrifice to my family? Like, am I going to have to either like leave them behind in a sense? Like, my dad was always away working, always like traveling around the world doing different jobs for different companies. And it was like, I don't necessarily even like remember it properly. My brother probably
More out of life and the traditional values, of what they expect. You look at, I was reading at the weekend, people not wanting to go to nightclubs, go drinking the same, more about their health, their experiences they have, the time, the enjoyment they have. Whereas I probably spent so much time working, my mindset was, well, you need to crack on. And then you do reach a point you think, well, why am I just cracking on? And so I don't think that's a bad thing, but it costs money to be able to do all the things you want to do or live even, doesn't it? So then, you might only have 24 hours in a day. But if you're not given the same advantages, you need more days because you are starting further behind, aren't you? So you've got to get to where they are, their start line, before you can even go on the race they're on. And I think that's the issue. And then that's about an equality piece. And in many ways, I mean that in a broad way. That's the opportunities you get due to your background, your parents, that whole class thing, if that's still a piece we want to use. And then you've also got the equality and the other aspects, haven't you, to do with your gender and the roles there that are set, beyond me.
But do you think it's quite interesting to maybe say, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, as a healthy debate, if I didn't, it comes from a real place of privilege to say if I don't like a job, really the world, and I don't think that you can build a business on that ethos either. There are really, really horrible times when you build a business and they don't serve you, and then it's not a nice place to be in. And there are many times that I do not enjoy my job, but I can't leave.
But I think you're right, and I think it's your responsibilities because when you're younger, I would have been much easier to kick back on something. And then as I got older, I was doing different things. People's other mortgages, their lives were tied to my businesses and things like that. And that gives you a great responsibility. My kids, the life I want, the opportunities I want them to have, that's tied in, isn't it? So I think as you get older, you do get more tied. But that links back maybe quite nicely because say you're, a friend of my wife's a successful woman, and if you do well and you're doing all of that and you've got those responsibilities, but then you do want to do more for the family. You might have had the family, but you might work through it. Your kids then might need you and you could really do with putting them first, but you need the money. And you think, and they might have issues in school or something's come along that's a real challenge, but without money and a roof over your head, that doesn't help them either. And then you're in this awful piece of trying to balance that as best you can, aren't you? Where you think, well, what comes first? And people say, if you're happy, it doesn't matter if you're poor and happy. Yeah, of course, money doesn't make you happy. It's a fallacy. But not being able to feed your kids, having real challenges, that's, being very like people who are on that breadline, that isn't great either. And I think what we're really talking about here is that the world today is really quite complicated, isn't it?
How we want the world to go forward, what the workplace looks like. I think we're in a really pivotal time where there's a huge change coming, isn't there? And I don't know what direction it's going to. There's got to be change for some things, but other things, people are really valuing their work-life balance, aren't they? And people are wanting, I think, lesser roles to prioritize that. I think that's why there's such a problem in Italy. I read about this, that they really enjoy their life, don't they? So they don't want to kind of go after the careers. They don't want to do more than their time. They just want to live a good life. And that is why there was, such a problem with employment. Are we heading that way? I don't know.
I don't know. there's a balance here, isn't there? That I know at times the harder I work, the more success I had to some level. I've tried to be more efficient as I've got older, but I do know that does work. Hard work works.
Yeah.
But then you go on the flip side of that, you say, well, yeah, but people still want all these other things. And there's people all around the world in developing economies working far harder than us, isn't there? You've got all that going on where maybe in the West we do want a more richer life, which is fine. I get that. I've wanted that more as I've got older, I guess, and it's become more apparent. You can have that. But you look at all of that and you're like, well, but you've got to make money, and the gross domestic product has to grow. The West has to grow. Growth rates are quite flat. If people work harder, we drive more business, we go forward quicker. So I think there's a big thing behind that, and then that creates money to do. But it's getting a bit political there. I don't want to get into that as such. But no, my daughters, I tell them, you can do anything, and they can. So what are the positives? Because things are very different than when my mum's generation, particularly compared to now. How do you see it in a positive light, or is it mainly hard?
I don't know, because I'm somewhere in the middle. I haven't necessarily had I don't know. It's hard to phrase, isn't it? I haven't really had I have had the struggle, but I feel like I haven't had as much struggle as maybe my mum's generation, where there were no other options. There are options for me now, and I've always had options. And I think my generation girls could always do it. We're just really suffering while we're doing it. I think Skye's will be that girls can do it all and not suffer as much.
I hope so, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think I'm kind of still on the middle bit where I can do it all, but I'm juggling it all. Whereas I don't think that Skye's generation will necessarily have to juggle it all.
Yeah, the pioneers.
I think they're going to be like the pioneers of the feminism, and the trying to figure out this new way of living
And make it work.
and have to make it work. I think they're quite outspoken, and they want things a certain way, and I think that's going to have to drive change, isn't it? And they're the next generation of employees, they're the next generation of entrepreneurs. That's going to have with some standing, isn't it?
It is, and I think you're right that if you look now that small changes can often add up to quite a big thing. Men start to take that on board, just do that little bit of help, take the kids away, make themselves available, mop up where they can, doing other things, child provision around people. All of these things can add up to something that might not be the perfect answer, but it's along the yardstick. But then you also look at, and I think it's here, it isn't going anywhere, and rightly so. But at the moment, you still see pushback. I see stuff on social media saying, until we don't have our socialist feminism system, things aren't, we all need to go back to the men being the men and the women being the women, or we're not going anywhere. And you look at that and you think there's still a long way to go, isn't there? Because look at the GDP women create. You can't just remove that now. Never mind the rights and wrongs of it. Of course, they're quite plain to see for most decent people. But you look, well, how does that go? So I think it's still going to be a bit of a bumpy ride, because I think some of the generations, until the older ones are gone, you've got to wait for the new ones to come through with a different mindset, because there's some people, they are as they are with it, aren't they? They just old-fashioned.
I think they get lost along the way, though, of what, they think that the feminists burning the well, if we go to war, would women want to be pulled up? It's not about that. Women can still be soldiers. They can still do it. It's about having the opportunity. It's not the fact that we expect to be treated the same. We can't treat everybody the same. It's just is what it is, isn't it? That, we're not saying 50-50 with everything. There's never 50-50. It's just an opportunity for some percentage somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah, there's an answer to that one, isn't there? And if we need more babies, are you going to do it? Well, yeah, it's like a bit of a flat argument in a way, isn't it? It's I think it's those traditional views that are baked in, aren't they? And people almost say them without thinking sometimes, and they don't really mean them sometimes. But it's just that dogma that's been around for years. And when you get a big change like this, which is it's over millennia, that it isn't going to be straight in 5 minutes that everybody lines up the same way. If you think, well, it goes back, it's really a 50-year thing, really, in many ways, isn't it? All right, you can chase back to franchise and, and all of those going back 100 years just over and all the rest of it. Yeah, it's one I from my view, I feel you have to talk very carefully about it, because you worry about saying the wrong thing, and you want to get involved, you want to do the right thing, but you think, will it come across wrong? How will that be perceived? Will people jump on me for that? How is all that looking? it's really difficult, isn't it? And that's in lots of things at the moment.
Yeah.
So how would we round up today? What would be the state of play on the nation with this?
I don't know. None of us know the answer. We're all trying to find our way. I guess we're gonna make mistakes along the way. We all just need to try and figure it out, don't we?
Yeah, Skye?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm obviously not got there yet, but hopefully in 5 years I might be able to give you an answer on what has changed or what is going to change. But again, like, you know, with our voices hopefully getting louder and like convince people. And I
I
don't
think it's the way it's articulated,
Yeah.
though, isn't it? I
Yeah.
think it can sometimes be taken maybe the wrong way.
Yeah.
You have to be careful not to sound like a
100%.
bitter woman.
Yes.
You know, moaning about these things. I don't think we're moaning. I think we're
No.
just kind of crying out for help.
Yeah.
Like, how can we contribute other than at home
Yeah.
with the children? That's been our contribution.
Yeah, like we're being told we can have a career and do all this. It's like, okay, but what are you going to do to facilitate that? Like, help us then. If you want us to do that, that's amazing. We want to do that. But then, like, you might need to also pick up the slack in other areas and help us with it.
Yeah, it's just about that contribution, isn't it?
Yeah, I think as you both were saying that, I thought in some ways there's a simplicity to it that if you've got 2 jobs, 1 child, it's a joint thing, isn't it? Ultimately, and that's the start. And then what provision is around that if you still want to work and you need help, you know, that the greater society provides, which is it's been half had a go at, and you do look at it and you think, I do question the commit we have as a society to drive that as hard as it should be. And then at that point, you've actually got a more effective workforce across the board, haven't you? But yeah, I've really enjoyed talking about it. I'm going to go home tonight and I'm going to cook tea. But I don't mean that in a bad way. But nobody spoke, you know, this proves the point. My dad, nobody talked about this in this way. It was like something you saw on the TV in the west coast of America. It was quite new in different ways. And I think that's part of it. So there is the noise thing. And I really think that's the best thing you can do. And then I think about my daughters and I really don't want them having that restriction on them.
Do you feel that way about your son? Would you put that in the, because I don't with mine. The boys I don't really ever worry about. I always think, oh, you know, the boys will be fine. When you think about the future of them, but my daughter, she's the one that, you know, I probably worry about a little bit more in what's her future going to look like.
Maybe. I hadn't really thought in that way where to some degree you don't. You even have little biases you have in there about what age you do stuff, the freedoms they get, how you are with them because they're a boy, and that you just notice it as the years go on. And even the younger ones get certain things slightly easier than the older ones because your parenting evolves and changes. But yeah, I think, why do I say that and encourage them that way about you can do anything, you know, drilling it in a lot. It's probably because I think maybe outside says the opposite. Otherwise, why am I saying that all the while? I said that to my son to a point where you know, my mum told me the same.
Yeah.
So maybe, it must be there, mustn't it, for me to subconsciously be triggering that off.
Yeah, trying to champion the girls.
Yeah.
Whereas it's just kind of a bit of a given that the boys, you know, you can do everything you're great.
Yeah.
Like the girls, you're having to knuckle down on and say you can do anything.
But sorry to progress it, but my youngest plays a lot of football. Amelia, the middle one, does a lot of things as well. And she goes to football camps. We go to one in Portugal. There's a lot of, it's a mixed camp based on age and ability to a degree. And there's nothing I like better than at that camp watching her play the boys and flatten a couple, take the ball, and the lads can't handle being beaten by a girl. And it is really quite, you know, you can't shout or say anything these days standing there, but you do watch it, and it is, and that might not, you know, as they get older, she's at an age where that can still be in a few years' time, and the boys get bigger and stronger, that changes. But there is a good play about that.
Like stood up and I was like talking to my dad, and one of his like male friends said something, and I like responded like quite quickly and like almost like not witty, but like snapped at him a little bit. And my dad was like, oh, look, my daughter's just made you look like a fool. Like my daughter did that. And he was sort of a bit like, oh, no, she didn't. No, she didn't. And my dad was like, I was proud to be like, my like little girl has just made like a grown man like a fool or whatever. And he was like really like upset and defensive about it. But I was just like, if my brother did that, he'd be like, no one would bat an eyelid. It's
you know, and there's a real subtlety in what you've just said there, isn't there? It's a positive in a way, but another way it accentuates the underlying gender stereotype of what that is, and then also making males feel belittled by that, you know, and then they counter that. You know, there's a whole bit there because it's gone on for generations, hasn't it?
Yeah.
That's right. I'm going to quit.
You're never going to win.
I don't know. But thanks for coming in today.